Hello and welcome to this special local history themed tea and chat as part of Local and Community History Month, May 2021. My name's Steph. I normally work at Melksham Library, so the poems and extracts from various publications I'm going to share with you are all from publications that we hold in Melksham Library in our local history section. So I hope you have a drink ready with you. I've got my coffee here, which I'm looking forward to drinking. And yeah, I hope you're sitting comfortably and I'll start sharing some of my findings. So I had a look, as I say, in our local history section at Melksham whilst I was preparing for this. And I came across just a number of a section of really interesting publications. Some of them are pretty small, but still interesting nonetheless. And the first one I'm going to start with you is this here, Melksham Bells, which is an anthology of prose and poetry by Melksham writers, and it was published as part of a All Angels Tower appeal for the Church of St Michael in June 1987. There were a number of contributions from a number of people, and on the back there's a nice little summary of the various contributors. The two poems I'm going to read out now are from Keith Wilkins, who is known as the poet postman, and he published a book of his own poetry called Chalk Horses, which you might want to check out to see if there's still copies of that about. But I'm going to start with his poem, which is called The Shades of Melksham Forest. 300 years and more since bygone cleared the forest floor, time forgotten since he trimmed the copse and lopped the spinney, felled the trees that he might nurture, open space for agriculture. 300 crops and more, the hard-won clay-bound farmland bore meadow memorial to former scenes arboreal, changing but slowly since reclaim, until the bold bulldozers came. 300 homes and more, spreading from Woodrow to Blackmore, erasing tree and mead, and to perpetuate the deed, each close-packed avenue proclaims a resurrected woodland name. Suburb in a garden, Savernake, Sherwood, Epping, Arden, Mapleclose, Ashdown, Dean, nor single coppice in between, municipal and clearly signed, whimsical forests of the mind. I think that's a really brilliant poem about how the Melksham Forest slowly, of course, was cut down and residential homes were built. And of course, a lot of the street names are called after names pertaining to forests and woodlands and trees. Whimsical forests of the mind. So I'd say this is by Keith Wilkins, and his other poem I'm going to share from this publication is called Clem, and it's on the theme of Melksham people. And this is about someone who lived in Melksham called Clem Carnell. Now here's a tale of Clem Carnell, who lives in Melksham town, ex-regimental drummer and craftsman of renown. You'll find him bent on tasks intent, no matter what the weather, clambering Quasimodo-like high in St Michael's tower. Up there among the buttresses, the gargoyles and the bats, renewing, renovating, he keeps our church intact. With Clem up in the belfry, the vicar with his flock, the church's one foundation holds steady as a rock. So if you hear a hammering sound when next you're in your pew, it may be Clem the drummer beating a tattoo. Then spare a thought for such as Clem, a toiling there upstairs, amid the joists and rafters, each time you say your prayers. 'Cause throughout all the ages, the Clems of country towns, by keeping churches standing up, have stopped them falling down. And that was a poem by Keith Wilkins as part of this publication of local prose and poetry as part of a fundraising campaign in 1987. So I'm moving on now to this other publication, which is called From Domesday to Jubilee, and it's all about the manor of Melksham Canonhold, and it spans over 800 years of bits of information and history of Melksham. I'd say from the Domesday to Jubilee. The first bit I'm just going to read from you is there's a small section about medieval Melksham. If I can just get to my page. So this is going back to around the time of the Domesday book. Melksham grew up on the banks of the Avon, where the river was fordable. The original settlement was sited where the Red Lion Public House now stands in the area known as the City. Although it is usually suggested that Melksham acquired its name from its connection with cows and milk, by the early years of King John's reign there was a predominance of sheep and only a few cows and nanny goats. The land which adjoined the river was very low-lying and subject to annual flooding. As soon as the water drained off in the spring, the protection from frost gave the grass an early start into growth. By 1219, Melksham was important enough to be granted a charter to hold a market every Friday and a fair on Michaelmas Day. During the early 13th century, King John had visited Melksham several times to hunt in the royal forest which adjoined the parish. The king, despite his reputation as an unbeliever, took an interest in the new cathedral proposed for Salisbury, and he endowed the profits from the rectory manor to the use of this vast building. So that's how it became the connection between Melksham and Salisbury Cathedral, and you can read more about that in this Domesday to Jubilee publication. So that was obviously, I say, 1219, and we did celebrate the 800-year anniversary of Melksham acquiring its chartership just 2 years ago. Now, fast forwarding just over 100 years, there's a little bit of a section here about the history of the cloth trade in Melksham. So it says here, Melksham has been a weaving town since as early as 1349. These early weavers worked on small looms in individual cottages. The most prosperous period for the cloth trade was in the 16th and early 17th century, when wool was brought in from the Cotswold, Wales and Midlands, and the woven cloth was exported via Blackwell Hall to the continent. There was a fulling mill in Melksham, that's spelled F-U-L-L-I-N-G, a fulling mill in Melksham in 1555, which probably stood on the Avon close to the present bridge. The fulling mill was a device using hammers to pound the cloth in order to felt and shrink it. These earlier weavers appear to have prospered, and the eminent Wiltshire families of Self, Audrey and Methuen were all descended from clothiers. Unfortunately, by the 17th century, the woolen industry was in decline, and in 1647, the weavers of Melksham and Seamed were complaining of want of work and of poverty, owing to low rates of payment even when the work was available. A scarcity of corn occurred at this time, and the impoverished cloth workers were driven by hunger and despair to the desperate expediency of rioting. And you can read a little bit more about the consequences of that rioting in this publication, as well as all sorts of information, all sorts of lovely illustrations in this publication. There's a cottage in Cannold Lane, the lovely maps and little graphs and bits of interesting details. So I would recommend checking out that if you're interested in the history of Melksham over the last 800 years. So Melksham has a number of industries. So obviously we've just already heard a little bit about the farming background of Melksham with the sheep, and also that it was obviously an important time for cloth industry and weaving. But another bit of industry which is slightly less known is that for a time there was a Melksham Spa. So obviously you've probably heard of Bath Spa, which is really famous. There's Cheltenham Spa, there's Harrogate Spa up in Yorkshire. But yeah, Melksham, they did discover a couple of wells in Melksham in the early 1800s. And so they decided, someone thought, let's build a spa here in Melksham. If I just get to my page. So yeah, so it was in the 1814, a proposal was mooted to build this, and there was purchase of 4 acres of land. And in the document about this enterprise, it was referred to as the Bower Hill Spa. And it was interesting that somebody made the point, if I just read from here, that a successful spa had to combine medical cures with a lively social life. For people visited spas as much to meet each other, as in Jane Austen's Persuasion, as to have treatment for their ill health. Now, there's all sorts, as I say, there's information in this little booklet here, which is available in Melksham Library. But the one bit which I particularly enjoyed reading and found really quite humorous was a little bit of an extract I'm just going to share with you, which was from Ward's guide to the spa. So Ward was a local printer, and he wrote a guide. And this is what it says about that. Ward's guide is eulogistic about the benefits of bathing, considered by many at that time as a dangerous pastime. Optimistically, it tells of the exhilaration of the spirits produced by cold baths, while the hot and tepid baths are said to refresh and invigorate the frame. However, one had to be careful, as baths above 98 degrees accelerate the pulse. They cannot be safe in full states of the stomach, nor immediately after violent exercise. The best time for hot bathing will be 2 or 3 hours before dinner, unless it is intended to bring on violent perspiration, when evening is the most favourable time. The hotter the bath, the less time the patient should remain in it. But the precise time can only be determined by the nature of the disease and the constitution of the patient. General practice admits of a certain latitude between 10 minutes and half an hour, and care must be taken not to continue so long as to bring on faintness or debility. I just love that, about how you shouldn't go into the bath after violent exercise, and you shouldn't eat it before dinner unless you really want to bring on violent perspiration. Pretty heavy stuff. I think of going as far as just being relaxing. I don't know about violent perspiration. But yeah, so some more interesting bits in here. The enthusiasm for this spa, I will just read this one other bit, did inspire Miss D. Cavanaugh to write a bit of verse. Melksham thy healing waters claim, no secondary need of fame, where rival qualities combine, the tonic steel and soft saline. And that's, I say, all about Melksham Spa. So if you're interested in that, do come and check out this as well, because it's really sort of a bit of a less known bit of the industry here in Melksham. Now, of course, one of the more recent years, obviously one of the biggest industries, of course, has been the Avon rubber factory. And in 1985, they published this brochure, available at the library, and it was dedicated to the many people, past and present, employees, shareholders, suppliers and customers whose efforts and support have enabled Avon to celebrate its centenary. Of course, it started in 1885. And this brochure has got all sorts of information, and in particular interesting is in the first page you've got a kind of a chronology of how the factory progressed through the 100 years. And I'm just going to read a couple of short extracts from a couple of the times of the rubber factory. So first of all, it was, as I say, started in 1885. So 1885 was the year in which Gottlieb Daimler invented the internal combustion engine, which in the following year powered the first motor vehicle. The event was to have major effect on the development of both Avon and the world's rubber industry. The new enterprise employed 20 men, and the equipment included an engine, a boiler, 2 60-inch calendars, 2 mixing machines, 3 heaters, and 4 pressers. Fast forwarding a little, a few decades, there was a correspondent from the London Times visited Melksham in June 1914, and he wrote, "A magnificent all-British business has been developed here from small and humble beginnings into full maturity. Established as a private family concern, it has thriven and prospered to a truly amazing extent. The Melksham factory employs more than 1,000 hands. The output of the motor tyre department is enormous." That was in 1914. And I just want to read one more bit. So if we fast forward again to 1966, and it was on August the 15th. In 1966, the Great Fire at Melksham destroyed the finished goods store, in which it raged for many hours and threatened to engulf the whole factory. It was an event which invoked a remarkable spirit of teamwork. Factory and office workers joined forces with the works and county fire brigades. Chains of employees passed tyres from hand to hand ahead of streams of molten rubber. The company lost 25% of all its new stocks, plus all moulded rubber products awaiting dispatch. However, the biggest fire in Wiltshire's history at the time, and it cost more than £1 million. But as a result of the remarkable ingenuity and cooperation, less than 2 production shifts were lost. So obviously the loss were actually, even though they seem to sound great, they could have been a lot worse. And of course it goes on to say that technically the company faced a development which was to have a major and far-reaching effect on the future of Avon and indeed that of the total tyre industry. So yes, so as I said, there's lots more information in here, and some interesting, lots of various photographs as well about the work of the rubber tyre factory in Melksham. So, of course, Melksham town has had a number of families living in it over the years. One of those families was the Redmans, who lived at Halfway House. And so this is a story of a Wiltshire family. Halfway House was based in Beanacre in Melksham, and there's several generations of the Redmans detailed in this book. But there's one of the Redmans that I particularly was drawn to, and I will share something about him. So this is William Redman, who was a farmer and banker. He was born in the early 1800s. And there you go, there's a picture of him there. Classic Victorian gent photograph. And William was the author of some lengthy and exuberant reports, and he used to write them in verse. And he often used to do this at the annual parish tea meetings held at Colston. And so one, in 1859, he headed a poetic effusion of Colston tea meetings, and this is how it began. "Come east and west Colston, both ladies and gents, while to you I recount some leading events which have happened to us within the last year, when around the same board we all did appear, and in peace and goodwill together we met at our parish tea meeting, now grown quite a pet." And this apparently was followed by 11 more verses with references to the churchwarden and the doctor and all sorts of things. So it's like his report but put in verse form, which I don't know about you, but I think that would make meetings with reports slightly more entertaining if it was all in rhyme. I'll read another extract. So this was a couple of years later, in 1861. He wrote some more verses. So this was a subsequent tea meeting in 1861. "At our Christmas gathering, as in former good times, your poet again sends his songs and his rhymes. And now, as your poet has so much to say, and thanks to acknowledge and debts to repay, to good neighbour Miles once more he turns round, who's true as the metal he hammers in sound. We're obliged by the loan of your kettle and spout. Last year, you remember, it failed to run out. Your speech too was wanting, so jump on the table and prove yourself a man both willing and able. And so on. So this was William Redman, part of the family, detailed in this, the Redmans of Halfway House, which is available in Melksham Library. And he sounds like a fun fellow, doesn't he, writing his reports in verse. So we're nearly at the end of this special local history themed tea and chat, and I'm just going to come slightly more up to modern day. And so this actually was just 12 years ago, in May 2009. Melksham Arts for All was a local project group providing exhibition space for the visual arts, and in 2009 they held a poetry competition. And a little booklet here available in the library, which published a number of the winning entries. And the winner, actually overall winner, was a pair of one, which was written by local Ali Harper. And a special mention was given to Saffron Rosewarne, who was only aged 8, for her poem on What's Under My Bed. And I'm going to share What's Under My Bed in a minute, but first I'm going to read one of the other poems, which is called Autumn by Janet Rees. And this was part of the 2009 poetry competition. Autumn. Fresh ploughed brown soil meets grey of sky, skylarks still singing, flying low, not high, vegetating, dying, smelling damp, dark and sweet, jewelled cobwebs on rose hips, wet grass under feet, cooing doves through mist, sound gentle and calm, cows mooing loudly, unseen but heard from the farm, chestnuts all fallen, leaves turned to gold, apples and pears lay bird-eaten, mouldy and old. For autumn is here when nature needs rest, to prepare for winter with its cold, icy breath. And even though it's springtime at the moment in May, I really wanted to share that because I really like that one by Janet Rees, Autumn. And I said I'm going to finish with this poem by Saffron Rosewarne, who's only 8 at the time of this poetry competition, who wrote What's Under My Bed. Saffron's probably going to be, if she's either 20 or about to be 20. And this is her short poem, What's Under My Bed. Hypnotising eyes stare down under there. Owlmen soundlessly swooping. Bigfoot terrifyingly stooping. Loch Ness monsters definitely screaming. Am I awake or am I dreaming? Werewolves wretchedly howl. Vampires quietly prowl. Suddenly I wake. I jump from bed and shake. Under my bed. What a shock. There's nothing but a smelly sock. I love that by Saffron, wherever you are these days. And that was a couple of poems called Poetic Thoughts, a small publication published by Melksham Arts for All. And that's just another example of some of the kind of the local organisations and projects that go on still to this day here in Melksham. Well, I hope you've enjoyed some of the things I've chosen to share with you from our Melksham Library, from our local history section. I'm sure your local library will have a similar wonderful collection of books and pamphlets that you have access to find out maybe about your local town or city or even village. Some of the books, they're quite dated. Some of them are a little bit browning and curling at the edges, but they hold some fab bits of information and extracts, which are a real treasure trove. So I do recommend that you go out and check out some of these this literature. And obviously don't forget that at the centre we have the Wilkins Swindon History Centre based at in Chippenham, which has also got masses more information on the local history of our county of Wiltshire. I hope you enjoyed the things that I've shared with you. Do message me or comment if there's anything in particular that you thought, oh, really enjoyed that. And I'll say, if you would like to follow up or if you'd like to borrow any of the booklets that we've got, do get in touch with us and we'll put them aside for you to collect when you're next able to visit Melksham Library. But for now, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Enjoy your tea or coffee. I'm going to finish up my coffee now. And thank you so much for joining me. And goodbye and take care.